There's a little circle that's described in the lecture about this. Very tiny vicious circle. And it's about, the guide uses the phrase impaired integrity. So first he talks about loving energy and being loving and approving of yourself and putting yourself out. And then he switches to a place where he talks about impaired integrity. The place where you are not in full integrity with yourself. Now notice that there's no objective reality to this. There's no standard to put up against you. There's no ruler to say, oh, you're 3 inches short of full integrity. The integrity the guide is talking about is your integrity. However you think things should be like, there are places where your integrity has dents in it. There's places where your integrity doesn't act itself out fully because it would keep you from gaining something that you wanted. And in exercising impaired integrity in the world, we realize what we're doing. We have a knowing. There's a deep knowing in us of what we're doing. And so to compensate for that, we try to seek acceptance from others. So the guide first talks about the flow of energy and loving people and letting yourself out of love for yourself and love for your fellow man and wanting everybody to put themselves out. So there's a real circular pattern of love going on there. And in the second pattern, what he's talking about is you have an impaired integrity and you know about it. So what you're trying to do is get acceptance from somebody else to make up for the fact that you're not accepting of yourself. So any forcing current you have to gain acceptance from others may come from a place where you do not accept yourself. And I almost have this feeling that if you could just peek under that, if you could just lift that little piece of flagstone as to why you can't accept yourself, that's where you're going to find a piece of impaired integrity. Some place where you are not willing to be everything you can be in this moment. And that's a third place the guide talks about, that just because we're not at a certain level of development, we judge ourselves. So there's a place where we may be able to see where we want to go. And the mere fact that we are not there yet, instead of accepting the positive of that, which is I know where I'm going, I have a real clear picture of who I want to be and how I want to interact with the world and how I want to manifest my values and help. I really have a vision. That's a tremendously positive statement. But instead of staying with that positive, we have turned around and judged ourselves for not being there. Now there's a joke buried in there, and that is that if you can't see it, you can't attain it. So the very thing that gives us the ability to grow and develop, we use against ourselves by saying, yeah, and you're not there yet. If you really knew what honesty was, you'd be honest and you're not. And that's what we do to ourselves. And one of the places where lower self integrates into our lives is it's as if it whispers in our ear, you're not there yet. Yeah, we see it, but you're not good enough. You tried yesterday, but you didn't measure up. And it is actually the positive part of us that cringes and reacts to the fact that we're not there. So lower self tends to use the child part of us, the part of us that's not mature and is not fully confident that we can achieve our goals, to prevent us from ever achieving those goals, because now we're in contraction and shame, and from that place you're not going to get to those goals. So what this lecture addresses is an attempt to become more mature. This is a place where you need your ego. I did a teleconference a while back on ego, and people would say, why do you need one? Because ego gives us a sense of proportion. Ego, like the objective observer, stands back and says, now wait a minute, it's not all bad. I know we have a few glitches here, but we can work these out. Okay? That's what the ego does. It's a traffic cop. It manages things. It says, yes, we're going to get there. We're going to need to go get some more information. We're going to need to do some more research. We may need to take a class. We may need to go call a friend. Okay? So yes, we see what we're going to do, and we're going to need more support to get there. So we're going to marshal that support. That's the level of maturity that the guide is addressing here. So it's not about what you've done. It's not about your imperfections, especially your imagined ones, but even your real ones. This lecture is about dealing with the mere fact that as a human being, you're not perfect and you probably aren't going to be perfect. So what do you do in that situation? So I'm going to switch for a second and talk about how we make the guilt worse. So what I've been speaking of is the fundamental reason why we feel guilty. And that is that we try to stagnate or withdraw our life force. And that we're not accepting of ourselves and loving of ourselves, and we judge ourselves and we tumble into shame and blame, even if it's subtle, inside us. Now if you're blaming yourself, you're going to be perfectly able to blame somebody else and judge and not accept someone else. So it's all one. So in terms of manifesting this, okay, once you've got an idea of the fundamental sense of guilt that's going on, which is a spiritual one, and the guide at one point talks in the lecture about psychology, and it's funny because I would choke before saying this, and the guide sometimes speaks very strongly, finger wagging. Psychology doesn't do this, and I almost gasp, like, well, that'll get some reactions from people. But that's me because I'm human, and the guide doesn't seem to be unwilling to put things out sometimes. And so he talks about the fact that psychology hasn't quite got it yet, because they're dealing with the effects. They're dealing with mental illness and neurosis. And the place that guide is coming from is the cause of mental illness, the cause of neurosis, the cause of forcing currents. And in this lecture, what he says is the cause is fundamentally not being willing to love. So once a cause is going, then we can talk about effects, remembering that that's all they are, is effects. So in the initial sentence of this lecture, Guide talks about that man would rather produce much worse guilts that are untrue than accept the tiniest real guilt belonging to the area of the lower self that he is unwilling to accept.